Paris, 1918. A woman walks into a psychiatric consultation. She's calm, articulate, not confused, not frightened in any obvious way. She simply has one very specific, very fixed belief. Her husband has been replaced, not injured, not changed, replaced by someone who looks exactly like him,
Tell me, who are
down
you?
to the smallest detail. She'll later be known in medical history only as Madame M. At first, it's just her husband. Then, it's her children. Then, neighbours. Then, people she barely knows. Over the years, her list of doubles grows into the hundreds. She isn't hallucinating strangers. She isn't forgetting faces. Every single person she names, she can describe perfectly.
We must maintain
The right height, the right voice, the right scar, the right habit of clearing his throat before speaking. She knows exactly what her husband looks like. She just doesn't believe it's him. Sit with that for a second. If you don't recognize someone's face, that's simple. You just say, "I don't know who that is." But Madame M isn't saying that. She's saying something far stranger. I know exactly who this looks like, and that's exactly the problem. Her eyes tell her, this is my husband. Something else inside her insists, no, it isn't. Two signals, direct contradiction, and a brain that refuses to hold a contradiction for long. It has to resolve it, one way or another. In 1923, psychiatrist Joseph Capgras, working with colleague Jean Reboul-Lachaud, published her case and gave the condition a name, Capgras Delusion. For a century since, it's remained one of the strangest and most revealing puzzles in neuroscience. Here's what makes recognizing a face more complicated than it feels. When you look at your mother, your brain isn't doing one thing, it's doing at least two. One part identifies who the face belongs to. A separate part generates the feeling that's supposed to come with it. The warmth, the pull, the unmistakable sense of, this is someone I love. In the 1990s, psychologists Hayden Ellis and Andrew Young proposed that these two processes travel along different pathways in the brain and critically, that they can come apart. Normally they arrive together, so tightly fused you never notice there are two of them. But if the pathway carrying the feeling is damaged, while the pathway carrying the identification stays intact, you get something like what Madame M described. A face that is recognized, but not felt. And the brain, faced with that gap, doesn't simply shrug it off. It builds an explanation. If this really were my husband, I would feel it. I don't feel it. So this cannot really be my husband. That single piece of faulty logic, reasonable even, given the evidence the brain is working with, may be enough to spark the experience. But researchers studying Capgras suggest something more is usually needed to turn that strange experience into a fixed, unshakable belief. A second, separate problem. One that affects how the brain evaluates and rejects implausible explanations. It's the combination of the two that may allow a delusion this bizarre to take hold and refuse to let go. This is what makes Madame M's case so important, even 100 years later. She wasn't simply confused about faces. She wasn't hallucinating people who weren't there. Her delusion grew slowly, precisely because the mismatch she was experiencing never resolved. Every time she saw her husband, the same gap reopened, face correct, feeling absent. Explanation: imposter. And because the delusion had to keep making sense of new evidence, it kept expanding. To her children, then to people further and further from her. For decades, psychiatrists treated her case as a rare curiosity, filed away as a strange exception in the textbooks. It would take another 70 years, and a very different kind of case, before scientists could begin testing what might actually be happening inside a brain like hers. In the 1990s, neuroscientists V.S. Ramachandra and William Herstein studied a young man they identified only as DS, who developed Capgras Delusion after a serious head injury. DS was certain his parents had been replaced by impostors. But there was one strange exception. When he spoke to his mother on the telephone, with no face in front of him, the delusion vanished. He recognized her instantly, voice alone, no doubt at all. Ramachandran and Herstein wanted to know, was there something measurable actually missing in his response to familiar faces? So they ran a simple test. They showed DS photographs, some of strangers, some of people he knew well, including his parents, while measuring his skin conductance response. That's the faint change in sweat gland activity that can occur when your body reacts emotionally, even before you're consciously aware of the reaction. In a healthy response, familiar faces can produce a measurable autonomic reaction. Recognition isn't purely intellectual. The body can respond too. But in DS, that normal response to his parents' photographs was dramatically reduced. His skin conductance response to familiar faces was not showing the kind of emotional reaction expected from someone seeing people he deeply knew. His brain could identify the face, but the expected emotional response wasn't following it. The researchers proposed that a disconnection between face processing systems and the limbic system could help explain the phenomenon. The connection that should have carried the feeling of familiarity from face to emotional response may have been disrupted in DS's brain. The skin conductance findings were consistent with that idea, even though the precise physical connection could not be directly observed. The same gap Madame M had described in words decades earlier, a face correctly seen, but not emotionally confirmed, could now be measured on a graph. Put these two cases side by side, decades apart. One, a historical psychiatric account. The other, a modern neuropsychological investigation. And they seem to be describing a similar pattern. A face that is accurate, a feeling that is missing, and a brain trying to explain the gap, which raises an uncomfortable question. Every time you look at someone you love and simply know it's them, how much of that certainty is actually coming from your eyes? Not as much as it feels like. Your brain isn't just showing you a face. It's cross-checking that face against memory, against voice, against years of accumulated feeling, and stitching the result into one seamless, effortless certainty. You never notice the stitching until, for a vanishingly small number of people, it comes undone. Then the face is still there. The person is still there. But the invisible thread that used to connect the two of them is gone. And the brain, unable to accept that the fault might be its own, reaches for the only other explanation left. Not, "Something is wrong with me," but, "Something is wrong with them." That's the part of Capgras Delusion that outlasts the medical textbooks. It isn't really a story about people who stopped recognizing their families. It's a story
Dinosaur, Daddy.
about how much invisible work your brain does every single day, just so the people you love keep looking like themselves. And that's where the story gets even stranger. Because you probably never question what happens when someone you love walks into a room. You look at their face, you hear their voice, you remember everything you've shared, and somehow all of it becomes one simple feeling. That's them. But Capgras shows us something disturbing. That feeling isn't coming from your eyes alone. It's being constructed by your brain. And if even one part of that construction breaks, the face can remain exactly the same. The person can remain exactly the same. But your brain can stop telling you that they're the person you love. And maybe that's the strangest thing Capgras reveals. You don't recognize reality simply because you see it. You recognize it because your brain tells you what it means. And most of the time, you never realize it's doing it.